Greetings and salutations, everyone. My name is Andrew Kirchhoff, and welcome to my YouTube channel. Today, we're talking about my top 10 running back rankings for the 2021 fantasy football season. On today's episode, I'm going to be giving you guys my perspective and opinions in regards to the running back position and how I think it should currently stack up. Again, we're talking about blue chip, the cream of the crop, guys that are being selected in the first two rounds of your upcoming 2021 fantasy football drafts. Not only am I going to be giving you guys my opinion, but I also want to explain as to why these guys are separated in value, what gives them a distinct advantage over one another. And you guys have heard me say it over the last couple seasons, but I always talk about opportunity leading to success at the running back position. Opportunity in the form of targets, rushing attempts, those continue to trickle down and turn into fantasy points that are oh so valuable to us and then eventually become touchdowns. But again, we'll talk about that at an extended pace as we continue throughout the video. Before we begin, I want to take the opportunity to thank you guys for continuing to support the channel, for the hundreds of messages I've gotten this offseason. Again, you guys have shared a lot of kind words with me. I really do appreciate you guys continuing to support the channel and help us grow going into our fourth season here on YouTube. Again, thank you very much. For those of you who are new, again, consider subscribing. We're going to be making fantasy football content for the entirety of the 2021 season, whether that's off-season content from rankings, mock drafts, draft strategies, live streams. Again, there's a lot coming down the pike. On top of it, when we get to the regular season, waiver wire, hidden gems, weekly rankings, live streams on Sunday mornings, those are things that you should consider every day from this channel. Fantasy football content will be on the horizon. That is a guarantee regardless. Now, before we begin, I want to let everybody know this is going to be for a half PPR scoring format. I want to meet everyone in the middle. Again, for those of you who play in a standard, for those of you who play in a full PPR, the only way that I can find a little bit of comfort is to kind of meet everyone in the middle and do it for a half PPR scoring format. So that's how the rankings are going to currently be constructed. So without further ado, I'm ready to start talking about some fantasy football. It's been quite some time. I might be a little rusty, so give me a break. But regardless, let's get into our rankings. Beginning off with our number 10 this upcoming season, I currently have Austin Ekeler. Now, again, it is August 1st, and these rankings are certainly subject to change. I mean, there's always a potential that a player could get hurt that could adjust these rankings accordingly. But as it currently stands, I have a lot of confidence in Austin Ekeler. Now, I had this exact same confidence that I currently possess last offseason, as Austin Ekeler was coming off of a great 2019 year. He finishes the number 6 overall running back in a half PPR scoring format. And on top of that, he was coming off of a year in which he was averaging 16.44 fantasy points per game. And going into 2020, he wasn't going to have Melvin Gordon take touches from him. So all in all, it was a fantastic year to potentially invest in Austin Ekeler last year. Now, unfortunately, of course, he had his injury and he missed significant time, and that certainly left him out of the running of potentially being a top 12 RB1. Now, with that being said, his injury did play a big factor, and many of you may be salty because of that last year. But prior to that injury, he had only missed 2 games prior in his career. So he is not an injury-prone running back. This is not something that we have consistently seen out of him, though people like to, explain the narrative that, yes, he's a smaller running back and perhaps he is more injury-prone. That's not going to be the case. The way that they use him and the way that the Chargers are going to continue to use him is as a 3-down back, but specifically a couple, peppered in rushing attempts here and there, but majority of it is going to be via receptions and targets and PPR fantasy points. Last season, in conjunction with, of course, Justin Herbert at the quarterback position, Austin Ekeler and him played 8 games together. Together, they averaged, it's a pretty ridiculous number, 15.9 fantasy points out of Austin Ekeler. In that span, there were 63 targets in the direction of Ekeler, which is 7.87 targets per game. If we go ahead and we expand that in a 16-game season, we're potentially looking at almost 100 receptions if we take into account that Austin Ekeler has had an 81% catch rate throughout his entire career. Now, of course, those are inflated numbers and could potentially, see a little bit of a regression this upcoming season. But all in all, with Justin Herbert at quarterback, Austin Ekeler has found success, even though we were worried potentially with the transition away from Phillip Rivers. We know how much Rivers loves to throw the ball to the running back position. Justin Herbert did it just as much with Austin Ekeler in the backfield. Ekeler ran 222 routes last season and was targeted 63 of those times on those routes. That's 28.38% of the targets on those specific routes. That share percentage right there is amongst the top in the National Football League. When I went ahead and broke down tight ends, wide receivers, and running backs, that's within the top 6 or 7 of the entire league for guys that ran over 200 routes last season alone. But all in all, Austin Ekeler's got a great opportunity. Sure, he may not be a guy that's going to sit and run the ball 250 times, but he's certainly going to get a boatload of targets that are going to lead the receptions, and the PPR opportunity there is going to separate him from majority of the talent. That's why he sits at our number 10. But regardless, a lot of people are going to talk about whether or not Austin Ekeler is going to be given said opportunity. Look at this backfield. Justin Jackson, Joshua Kelly, I'm not worried about those guys. They did not bring in any other talent to compete with Ekeler because they know how this offense should be functioning. Now, a couple of the disadvantages that we could potentially see this upcoming season is the loss of Anthony Lynn, the former head coach of the Los Angeles Chargers. Now, again, Anthony Lynn from 2018 to 2012 fed the running back position more than any other team in the National Football League in terms of total opportunities via targets and rushing attempts. That is something that's going to be hard to replace, but with a new head coach and a new coaching staff altogether, they bring in Joe Lombardi as the offensive coordinator of the Chargers for this upcoming season. Joe Lombardi has been with the Saints for the last couple of years, learning underneath the tutelage of course, Sean Payton. And from what we know, Sean Payton offenses love to throw the ball to the running back position, and that's hopefully what's going to transpire this upcoming season in 2021 for Austin Ekeler. We're talking about Alvin Kamara for the last 4 consecutive seasons for the New Orleans Saints, putting up 81 plus receptions in 4 consecutive years. I mean, of course, Sean Payton is a completely different animal because he's been doing that for, his entire coaching tenure with the New Orleans Saints, whether it was with Pierre Thomas, Darren Sproles, Reggie Bush. It's continued with Alvin Kamara, but hopefully Joe Lombardi has picked up a little bit of that and is going to bring it into this offense because, what better option do we have than Austin Ekeler? In terms of other running backs, besides Alvin Kamara, Christian McCaffrey, Austin Ekeler has really been the guy that has surpassed our expectations over the last couple of years in terms of receptions and targets going in his direction. But regardless, again, Austin Ekeler, he's going to get work on the ground. Sure, it's going to be peppered in maybe 12 to 15 a game, but those potential 7 to 8 targets a game that he's going to get, that is going to be the biggest difference maker going into 2021, and that's really what's going to excel him past a lot of other options. Again, there are other guys that are certainly going to get more opportunity than him in the backfield, but I don't have them on today's list because, again, it matters what you do with said opportunities. If you're far less efficient with them, then perhaps averaging 2.9 yards per carry isn't going to cut it in comparison to a guy that'll get half as many touches on the ground, but it'll make it up through the air. Either way, I have a lot of confidence with Austin Ekeler this upcoming season. Here's currently my number 10 ranked running back, and we'll go ahead and move on to our number 9. So our number 9 ranked running back for this upcoming season is Nick Chubb. Nick Chubb last season finishes the number 9 running back. The season prior in 2019 finishes the number 7 overall running back in a half PPR scoring format. Nick Chubb is an absolute animal. We all know this coming out of Georgia. Since he took the starting job for the Cleveland Browns in 2018. I know Carlos Hyde started the season. There was a little bit of Duke Johnson, but ultimately the talent of Nick Chubb shined through. From 2018 to 2020, since he's taken over the starting job of the Cleveland Browns, he's averaged 15.88 fantasy points per game. That is a great average, but it continued to improve this last season because of the implementation of Kevin Stefanski, the new head coach of the Cleveland Browns. When you bring in an offensive-minded head coach and somebody that is a play caller and loves to run the ball and has structured the offense in order to run the ball successfully like he did with the Minnesota Vikings. Kevin Stefanski with the Minnesota Vikings in 2019, they produced an offense that had the 4th most rushing attempts that year. And funny enough, this past season in 2020, Kevin Stefanski's offense with the Cleveland Browns had the 4th most rushing attempts in the National Football League. So again, they've built an offense that is around running the ball, and why not with a guy like Nick Chubb? They not only have a great, scheme, but they have one of the better offensive lines in the National Football League. We're talking about potentially 3 All-Pros on the line alone going into this upcoming season. They've got a lot of talent. They've just got to stay healthy, and they're in a fantastic position. But again, like I talked about, Kevin Stefanski's implementation in this offense really did grow Nick Chubb and his potential. Though Nick Chubb did deal with an injury during that Dallas Cowboy game, and we saw Kareem Hunt really succeed in the times that, of course, Nick Chubb was out with an injury. Since coming back from the injury from weeks 10 through 17, Nick Chubb was averaging 17.62 fantasy points per game. He came back as an even more advanced form because, in my opinion, the offense started to click. Baker Mayfield started to find himself, and though, yes, Odell Beckham was out, they had a couple injuries on the offensive line, they fully found their stride. And Nick Chubb, again, was averaging 17.62 points, all while, Kareem Hunt was still in the lineup, averaging 10.54 fantasy points per game in a half PPR scoring format. That is just, it's unbelievable that you can have 2 running backs averaging as much as they have but that's just how the offense is built. And that's why I'm not worried about Nick Chubb. That's why I have him as my number 9 running back. Again, throughout that span, as soon as Nick Chubb came back, he was averaging 18.25 touches per game. That is workhorse-like numbers, and we'd love to see opportunity go in the direction of him, regardless of how many targets he's getting. I understand a lot of people want to see a guy like Nick Chubb get himself upwards of 40 targets in a year, but that's probably not going to be the case because, of course, the presence of Kareem Hunt. Last season, in the games that Kareem Hunt and Nick Chubb played together, Kareem Hunt significantly out-targeted Nick Chubb. It's a pretty big disparity, 37 to 18. So that means Nick Chubb was probably targeted once out of every 3 times out of the combination of the two. A 33% target share in terms of the running back targets out of the team isn't going to be a world beater, but of course, that's not where Nick Chubb is going to succeed. He's going to succeed on the ground. I mean, he is an unbelievable prospect. He looks like Derrick Henry light. He's like a budget version of Derrick Henry. You might not be able to get Derrick Henry because you're maybe in the first round. Derrick Henry's probably going within the first 5 picks. But regardless, if you can get Nick Chubb at the end of the first, he is a light version of him that is definitely reliant on rushing yardage and rushing touchdowns and getting a lot of attempts on the ground. But to be honest, he can handle it. What we've seen over the last couple seasons are unbelievable numbers. I mean, I'm talking about last season, Nick Chubb averaged 4.06 yards per carry after contact. I mean, that's unbelievable. I mean, just imagine, okay? He's getting an extra 4 yards after contact. There are guys like Josh Jacobs, Ezekiel Elliott, Joe Mixon that couldn't average 4 yards per attempt before contact. So imagine that. Nick Chubb is an unbelievable running back. He is running through defenders, and he's had an incredible career. I mean, in the last 2 seasons alone, 19 of the 27 games that he's played, he's at least had either 100 total yards, whether it's rushing and receiving combined, or a touchdown. He's continued to get a lot of opportunity and deliver on it. Last season, he had the 3rd highest fantasy points per attempt with 0.941. I mean, that is an incredible number. This upcoming season, they have the 3rd easiest strength of schedule. A lot of things are looking up and up for Nick Chubb. Of course, the touchdowns are going to be there. 11 of his 12 touchdowns last season came in the red zone. I know Nick Chubb is definitely going to sometimes hurt on a weekly basis because of Kareem Hunt's presence. Kareem Hunt last season stole 3 red zone touchdowns when they were both playing together. But ultimately, I think Nick Chubb far and away is a fantastic option and is going to continue to be my number 9. All right, we move on to number 8. We have Jonathan Taylor, another guy that I was very hyped about last season. He finishes the number 6 overall running back last year, and mainly due to the help of some unfortunate injuries. Of course, Marlon Mack had an Achilles injury that knocked him out week 1, and it really gave Jonathan Taylor the opportunity to run away with his backfield. Again, he was drafted in the 2nd round to come in and make a sizable difference, and that's exactly what he did. Last season, in the games that Jonathan Taylor played at least 48% of the offensive snaps, he averaged 21 touches, 1 touchdown, and 20.51 fantasy points per game. These are incredible numbers for a running back that is going into his 2nd year again, and in an offense that is not shy of giving their running back opportunity. Again, of course, behind this incredible offensive line and underneath the direction of Frank Reich. Frank Reich loves to run the ball. Since coming to the Indianapolis Colts in 2018, not only has he made it a priority to build the offensive line and build a structure in place there, but he has continued to feed the running backs the ball. Out of all NFL teams in the last 3 years since 2018, Frank Reich has given his running backs the 3rd most opportunity with 1,511 opportunity. I mean, that's 500 a season. And, that's a pretty big margin in comparison to some of these teams that are barely running the ball 300, or at least giving their running backs opportunity 300 times a year. I mean, we're talking about an offense that loves to run and will definitely be feeding the ball to Jonathan Taylor. Now, I understand some of the hesitancy from you guys. Jonathan Taylor, yes, he's coming off an incredible season, but can he once again replicate those numbers without Phillip Rivers in this offense, with Carson Wentz taking his stead, and the return of Marlon Mack? I'm going to be totally honest. I wasn't worried about Marlon Mack last year. He's coming off an Achilles injury. It's a 1-year, $1 million deal. It's nothing to be currently worried about. Again, this backfield gives their running backs so many opportunities, again, 500 on average over the last 3 seasons, that I really do believe that the starting guy, no matter who it is going to thrive. And that's going to be Jonathan Taylor. Over the last couple seasons, I looked at what Jonathan Taylor has done under Frank Reich, and so has Marlon Mack. The head guy in this backfield is averaging about 55 to 56% of the total rushing attempts. If we can see that go in the direction of Jonathan Taylor this upcoming season, sure, we're going to see Nyheim Hines, Marlon Mack, Jordan Wilkins take touches here and there, and that's perfectly fine, but it'll keep Jonathan Taylor fresh, and he's going to get himself 270 plus touches this upcoming season. And I think with his efficiency, averaging over 5 yards per carry, he can certainly go ahead and deliver on fantasy, promises this upcoming season, as long as he continues to fire off as he has last year, find himself in the end zone. I think he's going to be a promising prospect. Now, of course, Marlon Mack worries people. I think Nyheim Hines is the biggest problem. Again, since 2018, since Frank Reich came into this offense, Nyheim Hines has averaged 72 targets a year. That is certainly something that is going to continue to chip away at Jonathan Taylor's value. But let's not forget, Jonathan Taylor is an extremely talented running back. He had himself 39 targets last year and 36 receptions. It's a great catch rate. And last season alone, the Indianapolis Colts targeted the running back position the fourth most amongst all teams, 134 times. I know that may be the Phillip Rivers effect, but again, if this offense continues to do so, they should be in a pretty good spot. I mean, in comparison to last year, we could see an even better Jonathan Taylor. Again, that was a rookie season without an off season, without much chemistry with the offense. If you go ahead, you get him in that weight room, continue to get him stronger, faster. The sky's the limit for a guy like Jonathan Taylor, and that's why we have him at number 8. All right, let's go ahead and move on to our next running back. Is our number 7, Aaron Jones. Now, I think Aaron Jones, of course, is an incredible running back, but I think what separates him more than majority of the running backs here is his touchdowns. I mean, the amount of touchdowns Aaron Jones scores is unbelievable, and it's launched him to being the 5th ranked and the 2nd ranked running back in 2020 and in 2019 in terms of half PPR total scoring. Obviously, I've thought about Aaron Jones a lot this offseason. If Aaron Rodgers was going to come back, of course, Aaron Rodgers has returned, and that's going to play a huge factor. Of course, Aaron Jones needs the offense to be producing at a high level in order to get him those touchdowns. Put it in perspective, Aaron Jones from 2019 to 2020 has played 30 total games. He has scored 30 total touchdowns. That's what I mean when I say touchdowns are playing a pretty big factor in terms of his overall productivity. But again, if this offense continues to fire at all cylinders, I continuously will see Aaron Jones potentially finding himself in the end zone because of how this offense is structured. Now, how is it structured? LaFleur, coming over from the Tennessee Titans in 2018, took over this team and really transformed the entirety of their offense. Since 2018, I mean, there's been a complete paradigm shift in terms of this offense. We're talking about Matt LaFleur coming into a team that prior to his arrival was ranked 32, 32, and 24 in terms of RB opportunity. And in the 2 seasons that he's been here, they've been ranked number 12 and number 7. They want to feed their running backs the ball. They have done so effectively, and they found a great running back in Aaron Jones that can definitely deliver on it. Since 2019, he's averaged 17.52 fantasy points per game throughout that span. Again, 30 games, 30 touchdowns. On top of it, he's averaged 14.6 attempts per game, 5 yards per carry, 131 targets throughout that span, which is 4.4 targets per game. And he's had 15 games out of the 30 with 4 receptions. Again, and that's saying a lot considering Jamal Williams has been behind him. Jamal Williams was even drafted ahead of him when they were both rookies. These two guys have been inseparable, but this offseason, Jamal Williams, of course, Aaron Jones was given the extension. Jamal Williams went to the Detroit Lions. Jamal Williams has been the receiving back for this team over the last couple years. In fact, in the last 2 seasons alone, he has combined for 80 total targets, 70 receptions, 489 receiving yards, and 6 touchdowns. That is a huge vacancy of opportunity for a guy like Aaron Jones to definitely fill. And I know a lot of people have been talking about A.J. Dillon, but A.J. Dillon isn't a guy that's going to be, really siphoning a lot of the receiving work away from him. Sure, there could be opportunity on the ground that is taken, and we expect that to be seen. Again, Jamal Williams is a guy that was touching the ball upwards of 80 times on the ground, so certainly why not a guy like A.J. Dillon, who's definitely built for it in terms of size. Regardless, when we go ahead and we see what Jamal Williams was able to at least garner in terms of opportunity, if we continue to, at least put that in the direction of Aaron Jones, he could honestly be an unstoppable force. If he is scoring touchdowns, seeing the opportunities continue to grow, why not? The sky's the limit for Aaron Jones. Another statistic that I wanted to, of course, mention is, the NFC North. The NFC North is perhaps one of the easiest divisions to run the ball in. Again, when you play against the Detroit Lions, when you play against the Minnesota Vikings, I know the Minnesota Vikings are improving their defense, but last year they were awful in terms of just stopping anyone in any capacity. I really do believe Aaron Jones benefits from the fact that he plays in this division. He's even had great games against the Chicago Bears. Their defense, they've lost a couple pieces here and there, and they've been a pretty good defense overall in terms of stopping opposing offenses, but ultimately he has found a lot of success, averaging 17 fantasy points per game against the division alone over the last couple of seasons. Aaron Jones has been a successful back. He will continue to do so with the opportunities that is given to him. I understand, again, like I mentioned, A.J. Dillon is definitely going to play a role, but Jamal Williams is leaving open 100 to 120 vacant attempts. That'll be taken by A.J. Dillon. Let's not forget, Matt LaFleur was the guy for the Tennessee Titans that played Dion Lewis over Derrick Henry. So just to put it in perspective, if Aaron Jones is playing over A.J. Dillon, we shouldn't be surprised. That's definitely going to be a possibility. All right, we move on to the last running back on this page. We have Saquon Barkley as my number 6. Now, I've thought about Saquon a lot. Again, Saquon Barkley is currently on the physically unable to perform list. Now, I'm going to go ahead and kind of explain the designation and as to why Saquon Barkley has been given this designation this offseason. If you go ahead and you practice during the mandatory training camp and you get hurt, you must be either cut or placed on the injured reserve. Now, you're not going to cut Saquon Barkley. You're going to place him on the injured reserve if, in fact, he gets hurt. Now, the problem with placing someone on the injured reserve is that they have to be on the injured reserve for a designated amount of time. So, in order to avoid any sort of setback in that certain capacity, they have placed Saquon Barkley on the physically unable to perform list, which is exempt from everything that is having to do with the training camp. And it allows him to not only work on his therapy, but get him ready for the upcoming season. I've heard a lot of rumors this offseason. Saquon might not, be full capacity at the beginning of the year. He might not play week 1. These are all rumors. I think he's absolutely going to be ready to go. Let's talk about when he had his surgery. Last season, week 2, Chicago Bears tore his ACL and meniscus. It was a partial tear. This took place on September 20th of 2020. He had his surgery about 5 to 6 weeks later on October 30th of 2020, almost practically November. Of course, an ACL recovery is about 12 months long, and I do believe Saquon Barkley is a different type of animal. And yes, he might potentially miss 1 game, 2 games, or at least be limited in capacity in those 2 games. But if we can get Saquon Barkley back for at least 14 games this upcoming season, he is a number 6 overall running back. Saquon Barkley from 2018 to 2019 averaged 19.74 fantasy points per game with 21.75 touches per game. That is unbelievable workhorse opportunity, and that is acting on said opportunity and delivering for fantasy football managers. That is an unbelievable amount. Now, of course, in an offense that is going to be a little bit changed because you have Jason Garrett running it, let's be honest, Jason Garrett likes to feed his running backs the ball. Look what he did with Zeke. He was giving Zeke 300 plus touches a season. If Saquon Barkley is at a position that he can healthily take on the workload, he's going to be able to deliver. Taking into account what he did from 2018 to 2019, it's a 28-game span. He had ran for over 100 yards 11 times. He'd only produced less than 10 fantasy points 4 times and had 4+ receptions in, I think, 9 out of the 28 games. The guy is going to be absolute stud if and when he's healthy. And I do think that, yes, this may be subject to change, but he could even rise in my rankings based on how his health goes. Because again, though the New York Giants have dealt with a lot of inconsistency over the last couple of years, of course, injury makes a big deal. But the offensive line hasn't been that stable. And I know a lot of people are worried about investing in a running back with an offensive line like this. But let's be honest. If you go look at the Pro Football Focus grades of the New York Giants offensive line, the Panthers, the Vikings, they are just as bad as one another, but nobody continues to talk about how Dalvin Cook's being held down by his offensive line or how Christian McCaffrey's being held down by his offensive line. I think that narrative is going to stop as soon as Saquon Barkley returns and starts to tear apart the league. And the reason why I have confidence that he can do that with the New York Giants is, of course, the talent that produced prior to him. Now, what I mean by that is last season in Saquon Barkley's absence, we did see New York Giants running backs be extremely relevant. There were 8 performances out of 3 running backs. Devontae Freeman, Dion Lewis, and Wayne Gallman. These 3 guys, they kind of rotated based on injuries and or opportunity. Of course, as soon as Saquon Barkley went down, we had Dion Lewis kind of pick up a little bit of the workload. Wayne Gallman, they didn't kind of pan out initially, so they brought in Devontae Freeman. But eventually, Wayne Gallman absolutely took over. The combined 8 performances that these 3 running backs put together, they averaged 14.84 fantasy points per game. But Wayne Gallman in specific, from weeks 7 through 12 was the number 6 overall running back in fantasy, because not only was he given unimpeded opportunity, but he was scoring and getting incredible amount of yardage on the ground. This is just a recipe for success. I really do think that Saquon in this offense can definitely succeed. I mean, we've seen him do it against the NFC East throughout his career, averaging 22.19 fantasy points per game against the division alone. I have a lot of confidence in him. I think they're definitely going to have a bounce back season here. Saquon is definitely going to help us win some championships. All right, we move on to our final 5 running backs. Beginning off with our number 5, we have Ezekiel Elliott of the Dallas Cowboys. Okay, so Zeke, as of the last couple seasons, has finished as the number 11 in 2020. Overall running back, number 4, number 5, number 10, and number 2. So he has been an RB1 his entire career. But the 2 outliers specifically is the fact that he finishes the number 10 overall running back in 2017. That was the season in which he was suspended, only played 10 games, but it was absolutely incredible. And then, of course, this past season where he finishes the number 11 overall running back. And you may be wondering, why was Zeke such a, underwhelming product? Well, it was mainly because the offense around him was absolutely horrible. I mean, it was one of the worst seasons in Ezekiel Elliott's career, mainly because of the absence of huge pieces in this Dallas Cowboys offense. Now, prior to the injury of Dak Prescott, I think that was in week 5, Ezekiel Elliott was averaging 19.94 fantasy points per game. I mean, that is incredible numbers. Now, if you go ahead and take the numbers after Dak Prescott was out with Andy Dalton at quarterback, Danucci, Gilbert, he was averaging 9.8 fantasy points per game. It's literally a plus 10-point decline based on the quarterback at the position. I mean, I'm telling you, prior to Dak leaving, Ezekiel Elliott was the number 3 overall running back in fantasy football in a half PPR scoring format. But then it all just went downhill because of the absence of Dak Prescott. Now, if you go ahead and just combine the statistics and see what exactly, the combination of Dak and Zeke have put together, since 2016, since they both came in the league, Ezekiel Elliott, when Dak Prescott has been his quarterback, has averaged 19.25 fantasy points per game and has averaged 24.11 touches per game in a 61-game span. That is an incredible amount of opportunity, and he certainly delivered on it, and I think he'll absolutely do so in 2021. And I'll tell you why. Besides the return of Dak Prescott, you get the return of an offensive line. We didn't see an offensive line in Dallas because they were all injured. Lyle Collins, the right tackle, played 0 games last year. Tyron Smith, a guy that's an all-pro, top 100 player in the National Football League, has consistently been one of the best left tackles in the NFL, only played 2 games last year. Zach Martin, perhaps the best offensive guard in the league, played 8 games last year. Travis Frederick, their all-pro center, retired last year. They had a revolving door at the offensive line position, and it showed. Ezekiel Elliott could not produce because there was no quarterback play, there was no offensive line, defenses stacked the box, and they abused Zeke. Now, of course, once you get a healthy Dak Prescott back, an extremely healthy offensive line, and you get back guys like Blake Jarwin, and then you continue to use this offensive wide receiver corps that is just unbelievable. I mean, when you have CeeDee Lamb, Gallup, and Amari Cooper running down the field, stretching defenses, playing 71% of the offensive snaps in 11 personnel, which is 1 running back, 1 tight end, we could honestly see Zeke playing against far less impacted, front 7s, front 8s, and it could honestly lead to far more success. And that's what I absolutely expect. Since Zeke has come into the league, the opportunity has absolutely been there for them. I mean, the running back position for the Dallas Cowboys has had top 12 opportunity since 2016, averaging about 477 opportunities per season. So again, that alone, incredible. Besides the work on the ground, the touchdowns, he's gotten an incredible amount of work in the passing game. And though many people expected Tony Pollard to perhaps kind of nibble at some of that, it hasn't really, shown to be. In the last 3 seasons, consecutively, Ezekiel Elliott has had 50-plus receptions. That is obviously going to take him above and beyond the guys that we've prior spoke about. Besides his 300-plus touches on the ground, getting 50-plus receptions and being a huge part of this offense is something that he's going to continue to be. Since 2016 against the NFC East, one of the tougher divisions, of course, the front 7 of the Eagles has been good, and the front 7 of the Washington football team is definitely beginning to improve. But either way, Ezekiel Elliott has averaged 18.51 fantasy points per game against this division. He's going to find success. I think he's going to have an incredibly impactful season now that the offensive line, Dak is healthy, and he is healthy. Again, let's not forget, he missed a couple games due to injury, which is the first time in his career. But not only that, he was probably questionable or on the injury report for 14 of the 16 seasons last year. So taking that into perspective, we move on from Zeke to our number 4 running back option prospect, Alvin Kamara. Alvin Kamara had an incredible season in 2020, finishing as the number overall running back. I mean, that alone shouldn't have surprised us, but he was coming off of a year in which he struggled heavily with injuries in 2019. He finishes the number 12 overall back in 2019, but let's not forget he had a grade 2 PCL sprain in his knee, and he only scored 4 touchdowns in that year. Again, injuries were going to play a big factor in 2019, and a lot of people got a discount on Alvin Kamara in 2020. And he returned to form. Again, he, in his career, since being drafted in 2017, has been a top 4 fantasy back 3 times already. And I expect him to potentially do that once again this upcoming season as my number 4 overall back. So, since coming into the league in 2017 through 2020, Alvin Kamara has played 60 games. In those games, he's averaged 18.96 fantasy points per game. That is unbelievable. If we go ahead and look at exactly what he was able to do in 2020, he averaged 22.42 fantasy points per game. And of course, if you go ahead and take out the game at the end of the year, week 16, the 15th game of the year, in which he scored 6 touchdowns. I know the averages go down a little bit, but again, if you're going to run the ball, especially without Drew Brees in this offense, I absolutely expect Alvin Kamara to be a huge red zone threat for this offense. But regardless, besides being a red zone threat, scoring the ball a bunch, and getting an ample amount of touches on the ground, where Alvin Kamara succeeds the most is through the air. 4 consecutive years of 81 plus receptions. When we go ahead and we look at the amount of routes he ran last season, he ran 359 total routes and had 107 targets on those routes. That's 29.8% of the amount of routes ran, targets being sent in his direction. I mean, that's absolutely unbelievable. That's top 3 in the National Football League as of last season. Now, when we look at what he's done over the, since coming in the league in 2017, he's had 28 games of 6+ receptions, but only 3 games of over 100 rushing yards and 4 games of over 100 receiving yards. This is not a guy that's going to get it done on the ground. Sure, he's going to score touchdowns on the ground because Latavius Murray, again, is just there to kind of filter in a couple, rushing attempts up the middle, runs up 3 yards in a cloud of smoke, as we all know. But this is a guy that's going to succeed in the passing game. But how is he going to succeed this season without Drew Brees? I mean, that is going to be a huge factor because Drew Brees, amongst all quarterbacks in the National Football League in the last 10 years, has been, in the top 3 in terms of targeting the running back position. That has been a Sean Payton bread and butter offensive thing. And to be honest, without Drew Brees, Alvin Kamara isn't the same running back. In his career from 2019 to 2020, when Drew Brees was not in this offense, Alvin Kamara has only averaged 13.92 fantasy points per game on average. And when we look at what he was able to do with Teddy Bridgewater and Taysom Hill last season, he only averaged about 4 targets per game in comparison to the 5.22 targets per game with Drew Brees. So if we take that into account, there could be a little bit of regression coming out of Alvin Kamara's receiving game. But I'm not so concerned, and there's a reason why I have him at my number 4 overall running spot, is mainly because there's going to be no Michael Thomas this year. Last season, with no Michael Thomas in this offense, Alvin Kamara averaged 27.32 fantasy points per game in a half PPR scoring format. As of right now, Michael Thomas had surgery, is on the physically unable to perform list, and is definitely going to increase the value of Alvin Kamara because, again, who else are they going to throw the ball to? They don't have Michael Thomas. They do not have Jared Cook. And this offense is relatively inexperienced, I would say. You have Adam Trotman at tight end. They brought in Chris Hogan, Traquan Smith. I mean, they really are going to be underhanded in terms of opportunity. They no longer have Emmanuel Sanders. He went to the Bills. This team certainly needs help at wide receiver position. And to be honest, regardless of who they put at the quarterback position, I think oftentimes, based on his target percentage, Alvin Kamara is going to be the best option in this offense. Last season, with Michael Thomas out of the offense, he averaged 8.62 targets per game. That is 3 plus his normal potential average. I mean, that is just unbelievable numbers. So I think, again, though Drew Brees is going to be out, the absence of Michael Thomas absolutely gives Alvin Kamara enough opportunity to exceed the fact that, yes, Drew Brees is not going to be there, not giving him the ball. I think the targets are going to be there regardless. On top of that, Alvin Kamara in the last couple of seasons of his career has scored 58 total touchdowns, 49 of them coming within the red zone, and 27 of them coming in within the 5-yard line. Again, this is a guy that, yes, he may be a smaller stature, but they're not afraid to give him the ball and let him punch it up the middle. He has done that, of course, 6 times in a single game, broke the record last year. Either way, of course, he does play in a pretty tough division. Again, when you play against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers twice a year. They're a pretty stout run-stopping defense, but regardless, in his career, has averaged 17.58 fantasy points per game against the division, against the Bucs, Atlanta Falcons, and Carolina Panthers. An easier division per se against the Carolina Panthers and Falcons, which always ends up being huge points for Alvin Kamara. Either way, we move on to our next option. Our number 3 running back going into this upcoming season is Derrick Henry, a guy that became the 8th running back in NFL history to surpass 2,000 rushing yards. It was absolutely incredible to witness what we saw last year. But, I mean, this has been a culmination of since Ryan Tannehill has taken over the starting spot for the Tennessee Titans. Let's be honest. In 2019, when Ryan Tannehill took over the starting spot, Derrick Henry and Ryan Tannehill have played 26 games together during the regular season. In those 26 games, there has been no other running back that has scored more fantasy points since then than Derrick Henry. He's averaged 20.97 fantasy points per game and 5.4 yards per carry, and has had 35 total touchdowns. Who's going to stop Derrick Henry? Because I don't see anybody doing so. Now, I understand the perspective of Derrick Henry for back-to-back seasons having over 400 total touches, which includes, of course, the playoffs, because that does take a wear and tear on your body. But yes, having back-to-back seasons of 400 plus total touches, being 27 years of age, these are things that are going to continue to pile up. But in my opinion, age is just a number. And Derrick Henry is defying history and continuing to break records based on who he is and who he continues to be. In this offense that is predicated on running the ball, I continue to see him improve every single year. I mean, this is a guy in the last 2 seasons, since Ryan Tannehill has taken over this offense, has had 15 games of over 100 rushing yards, has had 141 missed tackles forced, has had 87 rushes of 10 plus yards, 41 rushes of 15 plus yards, and has had a 4.05 yards per carry after contact average. I mean, again, this is similar to Nick Chubb, where he's making contact with the defender and getting an extra 4.05 yards. All in all, this is an unbelievable running back. He has gotten incredible opportunity over the last couple of years, and though it's not on the ground, he has definitely been able to make up with his touchdown totals. Again, since Ryan Tannehill took over in 2019, he has scored a total of 35 touchdowns, 26 of them coming within the red zone, 16 of them from within the 5-yard line. You might be thinking, well, he's not getting that many touchdowns down on the goal line, but let's not forget, Ryan Tannehill last season had 6 red zone rushing touchdowns. This is a guy that, of course, could potentially see a little bit of regression, Ryan Tannehill that is, and it could go in the direction of Derrick Henry scoring. But again, with Derrick Henry being such a force on the goal line, a lot of teams, they stack the box and then the read option kind of opens up for Tannehill. But either way, the rest of the touchdowns for Derrick Henry, besides those that were found in the red zone, have been from outside the red zone. I mean, in the last 2 seasons, he has had himself 6 touchdowns of 50 plus yards. So he's a big playmaker, and he can certainly carry your team, and that's what I expect him to do. Again, in the last 2 seasons alone, finishes the number 2 and the number 3 overall running back in a half PPR scoring format. When we talk about the division he plays within, the AFC South, it is the easiest division in terms of running the ball. Playing against the Jacksonville Jaguars and Houston Texans twice a year is unbelievably advantageous. He's averaged 24.35 fantasy points per game against this division, and that doesn't even include the 2018 season, in which he had 47.8 points against the Jacksonville Jaguars. You guys remember that game, 200 plus yards, 4 touchdowns. Yeah, the monster game. But that doesn't even include that in terms of the average. I know the Tennessee Titans, there's a couple questions regarding, yes, Arthur Smith, the offensive coordinator, he left. He's gone on being the head coach of the Atlanta Falcons. They took the tight ends coach, Todd Downing, and pretty much, I guess, promoted him to being the offensive coordinator. I mean, this is similar to what they did with Arthur Smith. Prior to Matt LaFleur leaving to Green Bay, Arthur Smith was the tight end coach. They interiorly hired him, gave him a promotion. They did the same thing with Todd Downing. This is a guy that has learned under Arthur Smith the past 2 seasons. Again, he is going to be able to run the ball, and they have even more weapons this upcoming season. You bring back a guy like Taylor Lewan, who is the best run-blocking offensive lineman on that team in 2019 in terms of PFF grades. You bring in Julio Jones, that not only is an unbelievable threat and one of the best wide receivers in the National Football League, but he stretches the field with A.J. Brown. You go ahead and you add that combination. Yes, you lost Jonnu Smith. That's fine. You go ahead and plug in another tight end there. You find yourself with an offense that is going to be just as great as they've been in the last couple of seasons. Again, Derrick Henry has been unstoppable since Ryan Tannehill has taken over, and I don't see him slowing down anytime soon. We move on to our number 2 overall running back. We have Dalvin Cook. Dalvin Cook in the past 2 seasons has finished as the number 3 and the number 5 overall running back in half PPR fantasy. Now, if we go ahead and we look at what Dalvin Cook did in 2019 and in 2020 and kind of put them in conjunction, From weeks 1 through 11 of the 2019 season, he was an unbelievable monster. He was unstoppable. After he hit week 11, he sustained an injury, missed a week, tried to come back, and then once again re-injured himself. So I'm going to go ahead and take the back half, the last 5 games of that 2019 season, and just eliminate him because he was just injured throughout that time. I want to see what a fully healthy Dalvin Cook is capable of. So if we take weeks 1 through 11 of the 2019 season and all of 2020, those 28 games, Dalvin Cook has averaged 21.98 fantasy points per game on average. That is an unbelievable amount of points. If you went ahead and you just isolate 2020, and you say, all right, he played 14 games last season. Let's go ahead and take his average. Last season in 14 games, he averaged 22.56 fantasy points. You go ahead, you expand that through a 16-game season. He would have been the number 1 overall running back last season, assuming he had played the full season and not sustained any injuries. Again, I know Dalvin Cook has had himself a fair share of injuries. His rookie season tore his ACL. In 2018, he dealt with a hamstring injury, was forced back a little too much. In the last 2 seasons, has missed 2 games each. I understand these are all things, but every running back is injury prone until they're not. The nature of the running back position, you are making contact, you are getting hit consistently, but regardless of that, Dalvin Cook has been extremely efficient, and if he can play a full season, he absolutely is going to be the number 2 overall running back, if not better. Again, in the last 2 seasons, he's had 13 games of over 100 rushing yards. He's had 3.65 receptions per game, which is absolutely unbelievable. 112 forced missed tackles, has had 74 rushes of 10 plus yards. Of course, a 4.5 yard per carry average throughout his entire career. That is something that's extremely promising. And with this offensive line that obviously is a little bit undervalued, but at times not been the best because, again, it's been a rotating door, guys just continuing to be replaced. All in all, Dalvin Cook's been a fantastic running back. If we go ahead and look at the first 11 games of the 2019 season and the entirety of the 2020 season, again, 28 games, we've seen 26 of those 28 games for Dalvin Cook either to end up being a game in which he surpasses a total of 100 yards, whether that's rushing and receiving combined, or scored a touchdown. He has been an unbelievable, consistent fantasy prospect, and he's not slowing down anytime soon. Again, in those 28 games, he scored 30 total touchdowns, 25 of them coming within the red zone, 19 of them from within the 5-yard line. These are statistics that are unparalleled to a lot of other running backs, and that's why he sits at the number 2 position. Now, when we talk about what the Minnesota Vikings have addressed this offseason, again, they're getting a little bit of an offensive coordinator change. Against Kevin Stefanski was in this offense, was a pretty big part of it. In 2019, 2020, Gary Kubiak took over, and they continued on to run the ball. And this offseason, they went ahead and they moved from Gary Kubiak to his son, Clint Kubiak, who, of course, has been with Gary since the days in Denver in 2016 and has, of course, followed him to the Minnesota Vikings. He's been the quarterback's coach there, helping out Kirk Cousins, but he knows how this offense should be ran, and they're going to continue to run the ball. I see no hiccups there. But to be honest, when we look at the team last season, the Minnesota Vikings were not a great team. They were giving up an unbelievable amount of points on defense. They give up 29.7 points per game. Just looking at how many points they were giving up, you would think, okay, Dalvin Cook probably saw some regression in terms of total rushing attempts because, again, the game scripts were probably out of hand. They were getting blown out. Maybe they were passing the ball more. Wasn't the case. They ran the ball 62 plus more times in 2020 than in 2019 with Dalvin Cook, even though he played the same amount of games. Again, this offense is continuing to buy in on running the ball, and that's absolutely going to be a key for Dalvin Cook. This is a guy that in his own division against the NFC North has averaged 25.47 points per game against the division. He's unbelievable. He's going to continue to be a monster. He's my number 2. We move on to the consensus number 1, and it should not be a surprise that we sit here with Christian McCaffrey as our number 1 overall running back. I understand many people were hurt immensely with his absence last season. Of course, was the number 1 overall pick in 2020. Unfortunately, dealt with multiple injuries and only played 3 games. But prior to that, let's not forget, when he came in the league in 2017, he finishes the number 11 overall running back. And that was honestly because he split touches with Jonathan Stewart with the Carolina Panthers. But then in 2018, finishes the number 3 overall back. 2019, finishes the number 1 overall back and broke the records for, he broke his own record for receptions in a season by a running back. He broke his record of 107 and he blew it out to 116. On top of that, he became the 3rd player in NFL history to have 1,000 rushing and receiving yards in a single season. And he produced the 3rd greatest fantasy football performance of all time. in a season with, I think it was like 419 half PPR points. Christian McCaffrey is just a record setter. And that's what he's going to continue to do. And I know many people have, said, is he injury prone? It's not going to be the case. He's going to return and he's going to be unbelievable. When we look what he's done since 2018 through 2020, he's averaged 23.63 fantasy points per game in those 35 games played. Now, if you go ahead and you eliminate the Week 17 game in 2018 against the New Orleans Saints, in which he only literally played 10 snaps in order to beat Matt Forte's record for most receptions from a running back, he would have averaged 24.19 fantasy points per game. But let's go ahead. Let's kind of sneak this down a little bit. Let's pretty much encompass 2019 and 2020. What has he produced? In those 19 games that he's played, he's averaged 26.06 fantasy points per game and has only produced less than 19 fantasy points twice in 19 games. That's unbelievable. On top of it, okay, let's go ahead. Let's isolate the 2020 season. I know he only played 3 games, but let's look at what he did. In those 3 games, he finished as the number 2, the number 5, and the number 2 overall running backs on those given weeks, and he averaged 27.3 fantasy points per game. Christian McCaffrey is unstoppable. In those 35 games that he's played since 2018, 22 of them have become games in which he had 6+ receptions. 10 of those games, 10+ receptions. This is an unbelievable, I've never seen this before. Honestly, LaDainian Tomlinson's the last guy that I really saw this from. And that's been a very long time. There hasn't been a running back that has been so impactful in the passing game and been relevant in the running game altogether. Like Austin Ekeler, yeah, he sits at number 10, but because he doesn't get work on the ground, he doesn't get those rushing touchdowns. But that's been the opposite for Christian McCaffrey. Christian McCaffrey scored 38 touchdowns since 2018, 32 of them coming within the red zone, 20 of them from within the 5-yard line. I mean, this is a guy that, yes, smaller stature, but he's going to pound the rock, and they're going to give him the opportunity to do so. I know that they switched offensive coordinators last year to Joe Brady, but just looking at what Joe Brady did with Mike Davis, I mean, when Christian McCaffrey went down, Mike Davis was unbelievable, finished as the number 15 overall fantasy running back, and had 70 of the 114 total team running back targets. So again, they want to feed their running backs the ball in the passing game, of course on the ground. I think they're going to continue to pick up where they left off. Christian McCaffrey is a huge part of this offense, and I know many people are going to wonder, is Sam Darnold the piece that's going to potentially hurt Christian McCaffrey? Let's think about what he's had at quarterback. Cam Newton without a right shoulder again. Cam Newton has been quoted to say a couple years back in that game against the Chargers, he threw an interception down in the red zone, ran down the field, made a tackle, and has never been the same since that shoulder injury. He's played with Kyle Allen, Will Grier, Teddy Bridgewater. What's Sam Darnold going to do? Maybe even feed him the ball more because he's afraid of getting hit, or, I really do think the decision-making of Sam Darnold will be tightened up. He will find himself far more comfortable because he'll have more talent around him now that he's not with the New York Jets. But regardless, I think this is a fantastic opportunity for Christian McCaffrey. Certainly is the number 1 and deserves to be so. When we talk about the division he plays within, besides the opportunity he gets, the NFC South is a tough division. Considering he doesn't play for the New Orleans Saints or Tampa Bay Buccaneers, it's going to be a tough one. Every season we talk about, maybe we want to take it easy on X, Y, or Z player playing against New Orleans or Tampa Bay this week because they've always been within the top 5 of forcing running backs to not have that many points at the end of a given week. Since 2018, Christian McCaffrey has averaged 22.08 fantasy points per game against that division, and against those teams has flourished. It does not matter what you put in front of him, regardless of the matchup. Christian McCaffrey is a world beater, and he'll continue to be so. He's my number 1 on the season. Those are my top 10 running back rankings going into the 2021 fantasy football season. I want to thank you guys for watching. Let me know down below in the comment section who you guys have as your top 10 running backs and what you think about my list. Again, these are always subject to change. There are some honorable mentions, guys like Najee Harris, Joe Mixon, who could be within the top 12, Clyde Edwards-Helaire. There's a lot of guys, Antonio Gibson, they're going to get an ample amount of touches going into 2021 that certainly have the opportunity to jump into this RB1 conversation. But nonetheless, I really do like today's list. Let me know what you guys think down below. Click that like button. I really do appreciate you guys supporting the channel. And until tomorrow, where we'll be talking about my top 10 wide receiver rankings for the 2021 season, thank you very much. Goodbye. Peace.